Thank you for joining me for another video. In the last 3 videos, I talked about Jewish scripture, the Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Ketuvim, the writings, because we're not very creative with naming things. This video is going to be different. This video is going to actually be significantly different. There's not a whole lot of detailed information in here. This one is basically going to be, let's call it the headlines of the newspaper, and I'm going to leave you to sort of look into the details on your own, because there's actually a whole lot that could be said about this, and I don't want to take up 5 hours of your time just to explain just a small, tiny little portion. And I absolutely could, whenever we get into the topic of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is chronologically speaking, it's the next stage of Jewish Torah literature, which means that this is after the biblical period. Unless you're a Christian, in which case it is... Actually, I think, it would have been written down just after your biblical period as well, but the majority of it would have been taking place right around the same time that the New Testament was being compiled. Compiled is the wrong word. Right around the time that it was being written. Specifically, I'm referring to the Gospels, which actually came relatively late, in terms of relating to the chronology of the life of Jesus. Chronologically speaking, Paul's epistles came first, and then, so on and so forth. There were others. I believe the latest book in the Christian canon of Scripture was the book of Revelation, which I believe came about at the beginning of the 2nd century, like around the year 110 or so. That would be CE, in case anyone was curious. That came after Jesus. Presumably, I don't know. I wasn't there, but I'm assuming, I'm going to trust the church's word on this, that Revelation came after Jesus was born. That being said, let's get back to the topic at hand. I can actually do a whole bunch of videos about Christian topics. I can talk about Christian scripture. I can speak actually very intelligibly about it, because I happen to know a lot about it. I've studied it in depth. Great stuff, in terms of study, but it doesn't really connect with, and I'm sure the Christians in the audience would disagree with me, it doesn't really connect with Jewish scripture in any real meaningful way. We could agree to disagree on that. That being said, before we get into the Mishnah, I need to explain to you, I already got my glasses in hand, I need to explain to you that the Torah is the only part of scripture that we need. It's the only guide that we need in life. If the other 19 books of the Tanakh were never written, okay, we could get by. It wouldn't affect our observance. It wouldn't affect our beliefs any. All that the rest of the Tanakh, we call it Nach. If you take out the Torah, it's just Nach, because, again, about as, good at naming things as, a 5-year-old. If you take out the T, you're left with the Nach. But the rest of the Nach really just sort of serves to reinforce what the Torah says, either by way of showing us the proper way to do things, or by showing us how to not do things, as is the case with people like, King Solomon, who had 1,000 wives. To be fair, 700 of them were concubines. That's not as fair as I might think, maybe. But that's not important. Let's move on. So well, it's not important right now anyway. It is important just for a different reason. The Torah itself, when it was given to us at Mount Sinai, everybody knows that we got the what do they call them in English? The stone tablets. We got those at Mount Sinai. That wasn't the entirety of the Torah. That was just sort of, let's call it the introductory course to the Torah. 10 Commandments, that sort of thing. But it gets much, much bigger from there. Then there are certain passages, and anybody is free to disagree with me on this. You would be wrong, but you can feel free to disagree with me about it. There are certain passages in the Torah, in the rest of the Tanakh for that matter, that make absolutely no sense all alone, all by themselves. Which is why at Mount Sinai, when God gave us the written Torah, he also gave us the oral Torah. And the oral Torah, as the name suggests, was originally passed on orally through teaching, teacher to student, teacher to student, teacher to student, right around until we got to the Roman occupation. When the Romans came in, things got a little bit crazy, but we'll get into that here in just a little bit. The Tanakh, rather the Torah, and the rest of the Tanakh for that matter, can't be properly understood without the interpretation of the oral Torah. What do I mean? Surely there are going to be a bunch of people that are going to disagree with me on that, most of them not Jewish. Let's examine why. It would actually be needed to have an oral Torah. So the first reason that we need to have an oral Torah is because reading the text is one thing. It's one thing to read. You should not just go back to the 10 Commandments. You shouldn't have any other gods before me. Okay, it's one thing to read that, but what does that mean? Does that mean that I shouldn't worship other gods, or does that mean that I'm not allowed to even, think that other gods exist? Well, now there's a problem if it's that second one, because in the Torah there are references to other gods all the time, all throughout the Tanakh. Actually, there are references to other gods all the time, so it can't be that. But now we've left the realm of the written word of Scripture, and we need an oral Torah to explain it to us. Now, I will tell you that if you're a Christian, here is why you should just sort of accept that the oral Torah does exist. I'm not telling you to study it. You can if you want. I'm not telling you to, become masterful in it. That's not even the right way to say it, but let's go with it. There are parts in the Gospels where Jesus himself argues from the oral Torah. Christians don't pick up on that because they don't understand it. Let me give you an example of Jesus quoting the oral Torah. If somebody does something to you that you don't like, this is not Jesus saying, this is just me setting up the scenario. Somebody does something to you that you don't like, and you want, let's say, revenge against them. Well, you shouldn't take revenge. In fact, Jesus goes on to say that you should treat others the same way that you want to be treated. That's it. That's a part of the oral Torah. Only in Judaism, it's not in the positive, which is treat others the way you want to be treated. It's in the negative, which is to not treat other people in a way that you don't want to be treated, which makes a lot more sense because you'll always know how you don't want to be treated. You won't always know how another person would want to be treated. Maybe, there are some people out there who don't like hugs, for example. They're a little weird, but that's not important right now, you might go to give them a hug because that's what you would want, but for them, that would actually be the exact opposite of what they would want. This is not a very, probably not a very common issue that you're going to run into. When it comes to treating people right, you're probably not always going to run into issues where the way that you want to be treated is different from the way that somebody else actually wants to be treated. But there will always be people who will not want to be treated the way you don't want to be treated. So if you don't like to be slapped across the face, maybe you shouldn't slap people across the face. If you now that doesn't mean that if you like to be slapped across the face, you should slap others across the face. You understand where I'm going with that? Now, let's get back to the oral Torah, and I'm just going to provide one passage where it shows that it absolutely had to exist. If you look in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 21, the context tells us that we're permitted to eat clean animals. Doesn't have to be necessarily as a part of a religious ritual. We're allowed to eat clean animals, provided that we slaughter them in the same manner that we were taught at Mount Sinai, that we were commanded, I believe is actually the word that the Torah itself uses, in the way that you were commanded at Mount Sinai. I don't care how deep you look into the text of the Torah itself, you will never find where it tells you the procedure for slaughtering an animal. Therefore, you have to have an oral companion for the Torah to interpret it, to explain it, to give you the fuller context of it all. Now, that being said, the oral Torah is less a group of laws and more a, let's call it, a how-to booklet for each law. As you might imagine, originally it was not written. It was oral. Hence the name, Oral Torah. The 2nd century to the end of the 3rd century, to the beginning of the 3rd century, CE, the Common Era, that was when it was finally written down. Originally it was just taught, teacher to student, father to son, presumably mother to daughter, but nobody ever really talks about them for some reason. They just sort of passed it down until the Roman occupation. Roman occupation happened and things got chaotic. So let's jump into it. So the Mishnah was compiled at, let's say, the beginning of the 3rd century by Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who was the leader of the Sanhedrin at the time. And I'm going to be consulting my notes back and forth, so you'll see me be like, yeah, and then it says, okay. And he gathered it from the oral traditions, the oral Torah traditions of Jewish communities from around the world. Basically, he sent out a letter to all the Jewish communities of the world. Maybe not every single one, the Jewish community of, the middle of nowhere, Africa, for example, probably did not get a letter because he probably wasn't familiar with them. The Kaifeng Jews, the Jewish community of China, the ancient Jewish community of China, that no longer exists. It's actually a really fascinating case study. That community no longer exists. Their descendants are there, and some of their descendants are still Jewish, but the community doesn't exist anymore. It's interesting. It's really fascinating group of Jews to study. But they probably, I'm not sure if they were around at the time, but if they were, they probably would not have gotten a letter from the court, asking for their oral traditions. But basically, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, listen, I want to get all of the oral Torah bits that I can. I want to, make a note of them because there was actually a very real threat of the Roman occupation wiping out Jewish observance among, the communities within the Roman Empire. The Romans were brutal occupiers. They were horrible, and they were known to execute Jews who were just, suspected of being friendly to the idea of insurrection, being friendly to the concept of pushing the Romans out of Israel, being friendly to the idea of a Jewish king, a Messiah. As you might imagine, right around the days of Jesus, things really sort of came to almost quite literally an explosive situation in the land, as there were, this Messiah and that Messiah and that one and that one and that one. There were a bunch of people claiming to be the Messiah, or who their followers perhaps claimed that they were the Messiah. You had for some reason there was like this explosion of Jewish messianic claimants at that time under Roman occupation, right around the same, let's say 2 centuries, and then they just sort of disappeared, like they didn't exist before, and then they suddenly just went out of style for a while. I don't have an explanation for that. No, I do have an explanation for that, but it's not a very good one. It's the explanation would be they wanted to be free. It's not a very good one. It doesn't really explain the phenomenon, because the Romans continued to occupy and oppress the people of Israel within our own homeland for hundreds of years after that. Fun fact, Pontius Pilate. If you're a Christian, you understand this is the guy who reportedly executed Jesus. Pontius Pilate is reported by Jewish sources, by contemporary sources, like Josephus, for example, for having crucified tons of Jews, like in the tens of thousands a day time frame. These are massive numbers. Now, they may be exaggerated a little bit, but these are massive numbers. Pontius Pilate was a madman. The guy was absolutely insane. The fact that the Gospels portray him as being able to hold a reasonable conversation with someone without just losing his mind is mind-boggling. The man was an absolute nutcase. He was so insane, right, that the Emperor Caligula recalled him back to Rome and fired him for being insane. Do you realize how crazy you have to be for Caligula, the man who appointed his horse to the Senate, to fire you for being a little bit off? If you know anything about Caligula, you understand that it's a lot like calling the how's the expression that, like the pot calling the kettle black. This is I can't get into too much of what he did because of I want to keep this video PG, or perhaps even G. But go study Emperor Caligula if you don't know anything much about him. Now let's get back to the Mishnah. My whole point in going off on that long little side note there is just to point out that the Romans were brutal occupiers, and there was a very real possibility that the oral tradition would be completely and totally forgotten if the Romans so desired to kill off all the educated people among the Jewish people. Now, the Mishnah contains 6 orders. An order is a group of tractates. We'll call it a volume. Matter of fact, I have one here that I wanted to share with you. This one is old. As you could tell, it's beat up, it's old. It was printed in Vilna, which at the time was the Russian Empire and now is Ukraine, I think, or Poland, Lithuania. It's one of those countries. I think maybe Lithuania. Yes, that sounds right, Lithuania. But it has the mark of the Russian censors who said, yes, we've certified that there's nothing in here that we don't like, because the Russians apparently have a long history of censorship. And this is the inside. I'll let you guys see that. You might not be able to read that, but that's okay. It is all in Hebrew. It's very old. It was given to me by someone who I didn't even know. But it's the date on it is actually 1851. That was the date that the Russian authorities said that, yeah, it's okay to print this. But so that's an order that is from the order of Nashim, and we'll get into that. The 6 orders are basically like volumes, I guess you could call it that. That might be a reasonable translation. It doesn't directly translate over, but that's okay. We're not worried about that right now. So there are 6 orders of the Mishnah. Each one contains between 7 and 12 tractates. Each tractate is divided into chapters, and each chapter is divided into Mishnayot, which is the plural of Mishnah. The total number of tractates is 63, so you can see why there is so much that I could say about it. It was written, with few exceptions in Aramaic. It was written in Mishnaic Hebrew, which was the form of the Hebrew language that was actually a native spoken language between the 1st and 4th centuries of the Common Era. Now, as a general rule, again, I'm going to go back to this, as a general rule, the Oral Torah was not meant to be written down. The only reason it was written down was because of Roman oppression. In essence, the Oral Torah is a living Torah. It is a practical guide, and I'm just scrolling through my notes here so that I can get to the next part. It is the let's call it the practical application of the written word. So, for example, going back to the example of the 10 Commandments earlier, you shouldn't have any other gods before God. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, that means that, and the Oral Torah actually gets very deep into it. It means, this, and it means that, and it means, oh, but what if this is the case? Oh, well, if that's the case, then this also applies. That sort of thing. I'm going to let you do your own research into that, because I don't want to make this video go any longer than it already is going, and it may shape up to be the longest yet. Probably because I have to introduce the whole concept of an Oral Torah in order for it to make sense. Now I'm going to be doing a lot of reading here, reading with perhaps a little bit of explanation just sort of thrown in there. And there's really not much else after it, so hopefully we'll get through it pretty quickly. The 6 orders of the Mishnah are Zera'im, Moed, Nashim, Nezikin, Kodashim, and Tahoroth. Now the word Zera'im means seed, and you might think that it's the plural of Zera, and it is, but it's not. But it is, but it's not. It's this is just kind of an interesting linguistic difficulty. So zeraim is very clearly a plural word. The best I can do for you to explain what the word is like is look at the English word fish. Okay, so if you have more than one fish, let's say you've got 3 trouts, right? They're all the same species of trout. You're going to say, oh, I have 3 fish. But let's say you have a bass, a trout, and I don't know, a catfish. Just while I'm picking, random fish here. The proper plural is no longer fish because you have different species of fish. The proper plural becomes fishes. And it works the same way with the word zera. If you have one type of seed, one species of seed, let's say wheat, it doesn't matter if you have 1 or 5,000 of that same species. The plural and the singular is going to be zera. If you have, let's say, wheat, barley, and spelt seeds, you're going to use the word zeraim to refer to them collectively as a plural. So you could even argue that it's a plural of a plural, which does occasionally happen sometimes in languages, but that's not important right now, so we're not going to get into that. I only bring that up because it's really just kind of an interesting linguistic phenomenon, and I think it's cool. It doesn't really become important until we start talking about some of, actually, the Apostle Paul's letters. We'll get into that whenever the time comes. If the time comes, I don't know that it will come. Now, the order of zeraim, as you might imagine, is primarily concerned with agriculture. We're talking about farming, that sort of thing. That's primarily what it details. It has 11 tractates in it, the first of which is Berachot, which actually does not have anything to do with agriculture. It means blessings. It talks about the prayer services originally. Well, I say originally, but at that time it would have been a memory of the prayer services at the temples that went along with the animal offerings. But they were developing it into, perhaps it was developed at that point. By the time the Mishnah was written, anyway, there were actually very clear rules for the order of the prayer services. And by the order, I mean, just kind of generally, it needs to have this and this and this. No real order for it to be in. So Berachot was the very first tractate in the order of Zeraim. It means blessings. Peh is the next. It means corner. It relates to the the laws concerning poor people. Giving charity, leaving the corners of your field for the poor to come and glean. To take. If you read the Book of Ruth, there's a perfect example right there. To come and have some type of something to eat. Demai, which is doubtfully tithed produce, that's produce that you don't know if it was tithed or not. Kilayim, which is mixed species, that's going to refer to literally everything from the clothing that we wear to how we plant our fields in terms of mixing things. Are we allowed to wear, let's say, cotton and polyester blends, or is that not allowed? Well, turns out, I'm just going to answer that question right quick. Turns out, yes, we can. What we can't do is wear, let's say, wool and linen, wool and cotton, that sort of thing. You're not allowed to mix plant and animal fiber in the same garment and wear it. That's from the Torah. Matter of fact, when I enlisted, when I got to basic training, they actually, one of the first questions they asked was, about people's religions, because they were letting us know about the chapel schedule. And when they got to Jewish, is anyone here Jewish? I raised my hand, and they're like, okay, you get special socks. I thought he was joking. Turns out, no, they issued me cotton socks because the standard issue socks were a mixture of wool and cotton, and which in Judaism it's not allowed. I just think that's an interesting little historical side note from my own personal history. Shiv'ith is the the next tractate that's in Seder Zeraim, the Order of Zeraim, which is the 7th year. It relates to the Shemitah, the 7th year of when we are not allowed to plant or harvest or anything like that. It has all the laws contained or concerning that. Terumoth, which is donations to the tabernacle / temple services. Maaser Rishon, which is the first tithe, and Maaser Sheni, which is the second tithe. Bet you didn't know there was more than one. There's actually more than two, but we won't get into that. Challah, which literally means loaf, but it's a reference to the tithe from your dough that is given to the Kohanim, our priestly family. And Arlah, which is like a blockage of trees, specifically, again, we're referring to the context of agriculture here. And Bikurim, which is the first fruits. The order of Moed, now it's going to deal primarily with holidays and Shabbat. And as I read off the names of the tractates, you're going to see, it's going to be, Shabbat. Oh, okay, Shabbat. Okay, that's what it is. So it has 12 tractates, the very first of which is Shabbat, which is the 7th day, the Sabbath day. Eruvim, which is mixtures. Pesachim, which is the Passover festivals. Shekalim, which is literally means shekels, which in this case concerns the half shekel that would go to the upkeep of originally the tabernacle and ultimately the temples. Every year, half shekel, roughly, in modern American terms, we're talking a 50-cent piece. Just throw a President Kennedy coin in there and you're good, right? The big one, not the smaller one. Yoma, which is a tractate dedicated to the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. Sukkah, which means booth, but it refers to the holiday of Sukkoth, which would be the holiday of booths. The Festival of Tabernacles, I think, is another common translation. Betsa, which originally was called Yom Tov, but it was changed to, and I can't make this up, this is just so weird, from an American perspective, but Betsa is named for the very first word in the tractate, which is Betsa. It means egg, and it refers to the laws for certain holidays. Rosh Hashanah, which is the Rosh Hashanah festival. Ta'anith, which is fast days. Megillah, which is literally means scroll. It's specifically relating to the holiday of Purim. Moed Katan, which means Moed Katan is like a little festival. And Chagiga, which is the festival offering. So you can see vaguely what each of these tractates are about. Now, the Order of Nashim, which is the one that I actually have here that I showed earlier, it deals primarily with family laws. So we're talking, I'll just get into that because I've done that work already. Now, it has 7 tractates, the first of which is Yevamoth, which means brothers-in-law. Ketuboth, which means that's your marriage contracts. Nedarim, which means vows. Nazir is the Nazirite, it goes into the laws relating to Naziruth, the Naziriteship, if that's a word. Sota, which is a wife that is suspected of adultery. Getin, which is divorce documents. I do think it's a little interesting that you've got Sota, a wife that's suspected of adultery, and then right after that is the section about divorce documents. I do think that that's interesting. I don't know if that was on purpose or what, but it's funny. And Kiddushin, which is betrothals. So that one's just kind of out of place, I guess. If you've got a cheating wife and you get a divorce, you're going to want to get married again, I guess. I don't know. Now, the order of Nezikin, by the way, means damages. It deals primarily with the legal and court system. So this is where, when people talk about civil law, this is really the order that you're going to find Jewish civil law in. So it has 10 tractates. Can't speak today for some reason. The first of which is Baba Kama, which means the first gate. Second is Baba Messiah, which means the middle gate. And the third of which is Baba Bathra, which means the last gate. I'm going to let you look into those because it's just, I'm going to let you look into those. Sanhedrin, which is our high court. Makoth, which means strikes or lashes, that refers to corporeal punishment, presumably, or not presumably, but obviously refers to corporeal punishment. Shavuot, which means oaths. Eduyot, which means testimonies. Avodah Zarah, which means foreign worship. It's our word for idolatry. And I'm just going to break the news as nicely as I can to you. Avodah Zarah applies to literally every religion except for the Torah. So even though they may not technically be idolaters, from the Jewish perspective, they are idolaters. So Christians fit into that category. Muslims fit into that category. Why? Because this is foreign worship. It's not that they're out worshiping actual idols. It's not that they're worshiping, how do you call it? Like an image, like a carved image. But it's foreign worship. It's outside of Israelite worship, and therefore it is the closest thing to idolatry that we have in Judaism, at least in the Hebrew language. We call it foreign worship for a reason. It's not because we're being mean and because we're saying, oh, those idolaters. No, it's because we're saying, listen, this may be a nice religion and everything, but it's still foreign worship. Next tractate is Avoth, which means fathers, and that's actually probably one of the most well-known ones. We read it for, 6 weeks out of the year. Good stuff. And Horayot, which means decisions, and it relates back to the decisions of the Sanhedrin. That would be the High Court, in case I haven't said that enough. The Order of Kodashim, which means holy things, it deals primarily with temple services, as one might come to expect. It has 11 tractates in it. Zevahim, which means offerings. Menachot, which is the meal offerings. Hulin, which means ordinary or mundane. It's like, the non-sanctified slaughters, that would take place in and around Jerusalem. What status do they have, that sort of thing. Bechoroth, which means firstborns. It's interesting that it's in the feminine rather than the masculine, but that's not important. We're not going to get into that yet. Maybe we'll get into it eventually. I don't know. Arachin, which means values or estimations. These are going to be, this is the value of that, that sort of thing when it comes to money changing. Timurah, which means substitution. Gerithot, which is excisions. That is the, excommunications, let's call it. That is spiritually cutting off an Israelite from his people and ultimately God himself. Now that can't be instituted without a Sanhedrin around, but we still have the laws for it, and it's interesting to read too. Merila, which is misuse, things that have been misused unintentionally in the tabernacle/temple services. Tamid, that relates to the perpetual offering, a continual offering that was kept continually burning on the altar. Midoth, which means measurements. As you might imagine, it has a lot to do with measurements, weights and measurements. And qinim, which means nests, like a nest, like a bird's nest. And that one, I'm going to let you read that one, because that's one of those that you would just be like, oh, really? This is even here? Wow. The order of Taharoth deals primarily with the clean-unclean distinction and family purity. Now, it's got 12 tractates in it. Kelim, which is the vessels, the utensils, the like pots and pans and everything that are to be holy or not holy, to be clean or not clean, ritually speaking. Ahaloth, which means ahaloth is like tents. Negarim, which means plagues, deals primarily with Zara'ath, which most Bibles will translate as leprosy. Leprosy is the wrong translation. It's a bad translation, but it persists. So let's go with it, I guess. Parra, which means a heifer. Taharoth means purities. Miqwa'oth is the ritual baths. If you're a Christian, this is your baptistry. This is the, but we don't do it, just when people convert. We have more occasions that we do it, but I'll let you read that tractate if you want, to learn more about that. Nida, which means separation. Specifically, it's referring to a woman's separation from her husband during her monthly period. Machshirin, which is like acts of separation. Zavim, which it means flows, but it refers to, I'm just going to give you an example, an irregular flow from an STD. And you can see where I'm going when I say flow. Again, I want to keep this PG. My kids are watching, and as long as I use big words, they're not going to know what I'm talking about. Tevul Yom, which is the immersion on the day. Yadayim, which means hands. And Uqsim, there we go. Can't speak today for some reason. Which means stalks. And that is the 6 orders of the Mishnah. We made it through, happy us. Now, there is one more side note that I want to throw out there. A Baraitha is a type of Mishnah that they got. Let me take off my glasses here. It's the type of Mishnah where they received the tradition too late. Basically, Yehuda Nasi said, I want them. I want to get your traditions all on this date. Let's say, the 1st of Adar, which, for the record, just passed. So by the 1st of Adar, I want your, next year, I want all of your oral traditions. I need to know your oral Torah traditions by this date because I'm writing a book. That's kind of what he said in the letter. And then anything that came after that date couldn't be included. So it came to be called Baraitha. Now, it is often held to be of secondary importance to the Mishnah itself, but it's still out there. It's still, people still study them. You're going to find it in the Talmud. You're going to find it in, other rabbinical literatures. They're ultimately compiled together in the Halach Midrashim and the Tosefta. We'll talk about those at a later point. Now, the Mishnah presents, and this is going to be kind of my closing thought, because I've already gone way over the time I wanted. The Mishnah is presented, or rather, it presents the oral Torah in a manner that it shows actual examples of actual cases that were brought to the Sanhedrin, and it shows the judgments and the reasoning that went into those judgments. It often will include the debate on any given case, the ruling and the reasoning behind the ruling. Now, the intent is ultimately to teach people practical application of the 613 mitzvot, the commandments that are in the Torah, and how to apply them to everyday life. So, it's one of those things like, in this case, you should do this. Oh, but what if, we have a similar case, but it's not quite the same? Well, use your best judgment, but this is the general rule for this. Maybe ask your rabbi, maybe ask, another competent authority who might know, that sort of thing. So it's really a lot less a collection of new laws, and it's not actually new laws. It's actually old laws. It's a compilation of old laws, how they have historically been applied, how they've been interpreted, that sort of thing. Now, if you enjoy that sort of thing, if you enjoy reading that type of literature, I highly recommend reading the Mishnah. I guarantee you will learn something. I promise you that you will not learn nothing. By that, I mean that you will absolutely discover something for the very first time, and that's great. That being said, I'm done. This has been a very long video, and I just want to thank you for sitting here the whole time with me and listening to me ramble on about this or that. Next week, I promise it's going to be a little bit shorter, and we're sitting at close to an hour now, so I mean, it's not hard to be shorter. Next week, we're going to talk about the Gemara. It is the next, let's call it the next stage of the Torah tradition literature. It's actually where it gets to be real fun. That being said, if you enjoyed this video, I apologize about the length. There's a lot to go over. I tried to make it as short as I could. I tried to include as little detail as possible, but, I am sort of long-winded, and that's okay. I accept that. Nobody's perfect. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Please hit the like button. If you've already subscribed, go ahead and hit the notifications on button. That way you'll at least know when I put out something new. But you'll probably still be watching this video by then anyway, because I'm so long-winded. I completely lost track of where I was going. Oh yeah, so this channel does have a Facebook account. So all you have to do is go to Facebook and type in An Unorthodox Jew. Find me, like it, The page, not necessarily the video. I mean, you could like the video as well. I would be appreciative. Like the page, follow the page, do whatever you want with the page. Share the page, share the video, get the news out there. If you know people who might be interested in this sort of thing, who might benefit from watching the channel, who might enjoy, just the sort of stuff that I'm talking about, like I do. I do enjoy it. There's so much that I could say that it's tough to narrow it down. I might even need to, take a couple of videos to discuss one subject. I don't know. But if you know someone who's into the same thing, who's interested in, learning about Judaism, by all means, share this video with them. Share my site, my channel with them, and you help me grow. It's going to make me better in the long run. I do apologize again for the length. That's all of your time I'm going to take up for today. Thank you. Have a great week.